Hi everybody, thanks for turning up. As the last talk of the session, we're going to take a bit of a deeper dive down the deep end of the pool. I'm going to be talking about how different disciplines treat something that they use the same word to describe, and how does the sort of newish, as Claire was talking at the beginning, the area of PhDs by practice, particularly in art and design, relate and learn from other types of practice which have had a very physical element, if not practice within the actual examination. So, to help you understand this, I'm afraid I'm going to have to give you a very whistle-stop tour of ethnography as a type of activity inside anthropology. We'll drag it back to something you might be more interested in terms of art and design, and it will give you a whole set of questions which you possibly haven't thought about before, but might help you when it comes to Aviva. So, ethnography isn't a very old word. It appeared, first of all, in 1730s. This chap, Muller, who was employed by the Russian Tsar to go around the Kamchatka peninsula as part of the colonial expeditions that were part of the Age of Enlightenment, and he picked up on the classic phrase of ethnography to describe his descriptions of the local populations that they visited. This was completely unstructured at this point of time, and probably for about the next 100, 200 years it stayed so. There were lots of people travelling to other cultures. They had different attitudes to it. There's Joseph Banks on the left, who underneath that outfit, he's got Maori tattoos, because when he went to New Zealand, he was tattooed in the way that a nobleman in New Zealand would be. So there's a very odd set of interactions with local culture. The other one is Frank Hamilton Cushing on the right, who lived in Zuni Pueblo in the US for 5 years as part of a way of finding out about Zuni culture. This is about 30 years before anybody had the idea of saying this was a good thing to do. But the way the discipline, the way ethnography is now thought of, is down very much to two people, Franz Boas on the right in the US, and Bronislaw Malinowski, who worked at the LSE but was Polish, who sort of founded the European tradition. And for these people, it wasn't just the going. It was also the having a set of questions to ask yourself while you're there, and a systematic collection of the information. So, this is a very famous early one by Evans Pritchard on the Nure. It is a whole selection of notebooks and information, visual information, which then get constructed into a monograph, which makes a great claim about describing an entire culture. This is a big work, they always are, and they make they place great expectations on the person who's doing them. So the discipline of anthropology is actually sort of the spine of it, is this whole selection of well-known monographs from different cultures which are used to explain different understandings of culture. And an understanding of being an anthropologist proper is that you know the canonical texts, and you also have experienced fieldwork yourself, so that you've done an ethnography and you know really what the people are talking about firsthand, in effect. Though you may not have been to the same place, you implicitly know what some of the questions were. The problem is that anthropologists, because they can only talk to other anthropologists about this, get a bit insular about what they're doing. And the problem with that is, one, how do you actually talk about yourself or your culture? How do you actually place yourself in this? These classical anthropologies don't actually mention, apart from the name on the front, anything about the person who's doing it. And in the 1980s, this became one of the crises of anthropology. Clifford Geertz identified, or he's best known for identifying, the idea about the fact that the anthropologist takes part in activities and the body is a tool. And you actually not only just experience and observe these things in the old sense, you also start influencing what happens because you're there. There's no such thing as a disembodied floating eye. You actually are part of the action. And the classic text with this is the Balinese cockfight, which is a great chapter to read about how he ended up being accepted by the village after running away from the police. So this changed the way people thought about what ethnography should be. And today, if you want the joy, there is a journal that specifically debates all of these issues inside ethnography. So it's about theoretical approaches to ethnography. And it identifies, this is the minefield side that I'm talking about, the consequences of everything you do. And every interaction you make with somebody, are you actually forcing that? Are you causing the problem that you then identify as a problem? It's not a case of just being able to go in and see. It's also known that the old classical positions, complete dislocation isn't possible. You are going to be there as a person. People are going to know. But if you say, oh, I'm going to intervene, you have to be aware that you're going to have effects of you intervening. So you live inside this awkward tension. And have pity on poor anthropological PhD students who have to actually identify their position and defend it in their viva. And this is a classic part of an anthropological viva, is one of the questions we'll talk about your methodology, and then you know what you're in for. But anthropologists are people, courtesy of PhD. If you've never seen the cartoon, you really ought to get hold of it. But Tejal, the anthropologist in the team, is known for being an activist. And I think she's a wonderful example of the fact that anthropologists are people. They have a set of their own belief systems, which they drag around with them, and they have particular political persuasions. You have to accept that you do have a biased point of view about most things, and that you tend to bring these to the party wherever you go. The other option is these people who get completely removed from society that they're living in and just hide in ivory towers in places. That's the caricatures. But just to give some very quick examples of how anthropology goes outside the discipline. Margaret Mead, she used her research to advocate for more sexual freedom in the US in the middle of the 20th century. So she brought the information from her work in Samoa. And as it says here, a psychological study of primitive, I can't remember that last word, but it's for Western civilization. So this is the message for Western civilization, and it's illustrated. So you've got this book that's supposed to affect the US using Samoa as the template for a better society. On the other side, there is a long tradition of the US military using anthropological information in military campaigns. It goes back to the early 20th century. It's still going on today in Afghanistan. There is a debate about how much anthropologists should get involved with the US military. And David Price has written long and hard about this. There is now a faction, and this is where we're getting close to the interesting bit, possibly, or the even more interesting bit, I should say, of applied anthropology, or it's sometimes called critical anthropology, where the anthropologist takes a specific viewpoint, takes a specific viewpoint on a particular problem, and then conducts the ethnography with that aim in mind. So we've got people talking about solving obesity as a problem. Now, to do that, you have to say you believe obesity is a problem. The Latino threat is actually about the US perceiving South America or anybody below that line, and we know about that wall now, don't we, as a threat, and why actually, in reality, it's a completely different story. But that is the question that person says. Chavez takes a completely contrary viewpoint to Donald Trump on that. And then beyond that, you get to design anthropology, which has sort of assembled itself as a new discipline. It's a combination of applied anthropology and material culture. So you've got this hybridity that's occurring. The problem that you have with a lot of this, and this is where I'll go through some of the key aspects, is if you look at it from a classical anthropological viewpoint, there's a lot of questions that don't get asked, let alone answered. Hard to answer questions that don't get asked, isn't it? We saw this one this morning, and this is great. This is actually, Melissa presented something similar with it, and this identifies how within the design cycle ethnography gets used as a way of improving it with whether it's co-design, whether it's actually testing. Those are two different things. And I think the classic example is Lucy's work with IBM. No, is it IBM? I can never remember. But it's actually the big green button that you found on the photocopiers is the consequence of her working with people and seeing that they couldn't find where to press the button easily when they were using them, holding a cup of coffee in their hand and 300 copies. So that was a small incremental material development, which was the benefit of her watching people using the machines, ask them what would work better, how they feel good about it. The book's available, it's certainly a good read. It is, to use the old phrase from 1066, seen as a good thing. And I think it's not properly unpacked why it is a good thing. It's a good thing because the people who were involved in it all knew what they were letting themselves in for. Nobody actually had a problem with the idea of photocopiers existing in their lives. People wanted to be able to interact with photocopiers better. And I think, again, I don't want to keep on picking up Melissa's, but you had those points that you said about why you wanted that product to go onto the market, how it related to education. That states your position. That makes me feel comfortable because I know what you're talking about. But you get a lot of people who'll start doing things that don't. I'm not immediately pointing at this, but I will mention there have been quite a number of surveys, and this is one done by Loughborough about using heating. How do you cut your heating bills? Cutting heating bills is a good thing. Apparently, that's the statement. So how do we get people to do it? One of the things that they started to notice in a number of these surveys is if you had a meter that people could see, they would then start to change their behaviour in response to it. They also noticed that children would watch the meter and then tell their parents off. Now, okay, if you're talking about the question, how do you lower the heating bill, anything is viable. But if I was going to say, well, if you chop people's arms off, they can no longer turn the dial up, people might start getting a little bit upset about it. And when you start thinking, are you mobilizing people's children in order to pester their parents? How are you affecting the dynamic of the family by doing this? You start getting into a slightly weirder space where it might be a bit more uncomfortable. Who are you giving the power to in the family? Does this start to change a family dynamic? And if you don't start asking those questions and just use it as it's to do this without thinking of the other questions, you start having problems with what you're doing. Because the ideal, we hear the phrase a lot, is about co-creation. We sort of see these situations where people get asked into the workshop to test. We saw the kids testing the material, kids were having a great time. That situation's not too bad as, otherwise, I would say bad, makes it sound as if it's slightly bad. It's not bad. But there is a power imbalance in this. You are inviting people into your space to do what you want them to do. Nobody knocked on your door and said, I want to change this, this, and this, do it for me. There is a power imbalance. It's the same as in anthropology. The anthropologist is in a different position to the subjects that they're looking at. How you arrange this relationship is one of the crucial aspects in the discipline. I think it should be equally important in any design anthropology aspect. Because I keep finding things like this, and this worries me. Also, designers may create new product ideas that satisfy needs consumers did not know they had. That's great. unless you're using it as an excuse for foisting something that people didn't want and telling them you didn't know you wanted this. So how do you actually defend that position? At what point does it slip into a point of you're actually using information about people to manipulate them to your ends that you've decided are important? This is actually from a series of slides about digital anthropology that's on the net, so the person apparently is happy with that sentence, as is consumer faces with this one, obligatory Venn diagram. But when we start talking about to gain insights on branding issues, to develop portrait segmentation, consumer portraits segmentation, it sounds like a very bland phrase, but are you using this to exclude people? You're making the decisions about what you use the data for. They don't have the option. They're just providing you with material that you manipulate. And yet it's being called ethnography and consumer research. It's research on consumers, not with consumers, when it gets to this point. And where do you go over the line with this? Are there any spaces that aren't worth monetizing? Is there any part of the culture that should be living outside of this influence? So those are the questions I would like people, when they're thinking about design, to actually approach. I've got this example here. We're almost at the conclusion now. I always have slight problems with this, not because it says improving financial capability. That's great, that's a positive thing. But are you actually encouraging people to take up debt, is actually what they're selling. You don't know because it's being presented in this way. And these organizations they've got the sort of names that you can trust. Now, there are a lot of situations in the developing world in which anthropologists have criticized development projects that do exactly that people end up following these systems that are badly thought out and end up in debt that they cannot get out of. So just because it says it's doing positive things doesn't necessarily mean it is. And this is actually in Western Europe. The idea of people being financially capable and able to juggle money is seen as a good thing. So you're on a bit of a sticky wicket contesting this. The area of research that I work in is about the issues with certified fair trade gold is one of them, as you see here. It's about the issue of where gold comes from when it's used. There is no set belief system that you can call on. There's no clear conventions for what to do. So one of the biggest issues I have with my fieldwork is everybody expects me to be on their side against the others. I'm negotiating situations with large corporations, activist organizations, grassroots companies, individuals who have a viewpoint that is all their own, but they feel the entire world should be adhering to. And I have no external compass. For me, my training as an anthropologist alerted me to this, and my fieldwork was 4 years of struggling through it. In these sort of situations is when you're really at the cutting edge and you're stuck on your own and you have to make the decision. You will find that the same thing occurs at some point if you're doing an ethnography. And this brings it up to the aspect of ethics. For those of you who are PhD students here, in the research methods course, you'll have the joyful experience of me going on about this at great length. The rest of you don't have to cope with that because we've reached the end. Thank you very much.